In this week's episode, I will be talking about Emile Zola, the French author from the 19th century, one of the most prolific writers and one who is intertwined with French history, as we shall soon see. Emile was born in 1840, the same year as Claude Monet, the Impressionist painter, and Peter Tchaikovsky, the Russian composer. So Zola was in good company in terms of arts and literature during this time frame. Also born in the same year was the English novelist Thomas Hardy, who wrote Far from the Madding Crowd. So this was a time of great social and technological change, and this was happening across Europe, and it was reflected in all the arts in each country in different ways. The second thing you should know about Emile Zola is that he started out as a poor journalist. He didn't have a lot of money, but he started submitting articles to various periodicals, and ultimately he became a successful novelist later on. Zola's most famous work is his 20-book series about this family and the saga of their family tree, and it's called the Rougon-Macquart series. And the books I'll be talking about today are two of the installments in this series. The third thing you should know about Emile Zola is that he was someone very active in politics of his day. At least he was interested early on and then became actively involved in 1898, which is when he wrote in defense of Alfred Dreyfus. Now, if you've never heard of Dreyfus, he was a Jewish French military officer who was accused of treasonous activity against the French government. And it was a very high-profile case of the time, highly political, and it extended for many years. It was essentially symbolic of some of the greater societal divisions going on in France at the time. It became so heated that Zola had to leave France for a while. He fled to England to escape imprisonment for his views that Dreyfus was innocent. And Zola could only return later to France when opinion had turned in favor of Dreyfus and there was a possibility of his exoneration. So that is the three-part summary of Zola. There's much more that you can learn about his life, but those are the points which I think really sum up who he was and how he fit into both the literary and the historical scene of his time. I first came across Zola and his books in one of my college classes. It was a history of Europe in the 19th century. We covered a lot of ground, and the one book that was required reading was this book called The Lady's Paradise by Zola, and it was the 11th book in his Rougon-Macquart series. The Lady's Paradise takes place in the 1860s, and for some context, that is the pretty much the middle of the Second Empire, the Second French Empire, and this was headed by Napoleon III, and Napoleon III was the nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. France of this period was seeing huge increases economically and in their general prosperity. So The Lady's Paradise is about one of these success stories, or at least what the businessman at the heart of the story considered to be his great success. And that is this clothing shop called The Lady's Paradise. It's essentially a small shopping mall, and it's something that this businessman sets up in a sort of rundown part of the neighborhood, but he completely transforms this area of Paris, and in fact, the shop becomes such a success that it threatens to destroy all the other shops around because this businessman is using certain innovations, a certain amount of risk, and offering very cheap prices and an unheard of variety. You can see how all the people that would normally shop at those other stores are immediately drawn to this new store called The Lady's Paradise. This is all the brainchild of Octave Mouret, our businessman. When I started reading this book for the course, I was pretty much drawn in. I was surprised that it was a page-turner, but at the heart of every page-turner is some kind of tremendous conflict. And here it's actually in the form of a villain, and I think of Mouret as the antagonist of the story. He's extremely brilliant. I mean, He converts this truly nondescript area of the neighborhood into a bright and clean and exciting shopping experience. And he creates jobs for hundreds of people that need jobs, including veterans of wars. So he's kind of a genius in that regard and has done a lot of good for society in that way. But at the same time, we learn as the story goes on that Mouret can stoop extremely low. He considers himself to be an expert at seduction, and he pretends to be friends and even the boyfriend of various women just to make business connections and improve his profits. And he takes very little care of what happens to the people after he's taken advantage of them. Zola describes this situation as, quote, "They all belonged to him. They were his property, and he belonged to none of them. When he had extracted his fortune and his pleasure from them, he would throw them on the rubbish heap for those who could still make a living out of them." So that's the kind of person that Mouret is on a professional and personal level. As an aside, there was actually a 2012 BBC adaptation of this story, and what I noticed in that is the script seemed to downplay Mouret's nastiness, but he's pretty bad, and by modern standards, I think he would probably have been guilty of harassment that actually has some very serious consequences, or implications, I should say, as the story goes on. And we see the journey of the heroine, whose name is Denise Baudu. Denise is the niece of a small business owner, and her uncle owns a draper's shop in the area. And as you can imagine, this draper's shop is pretty much overcome by the much larger, more efficient, and machine-like running of the Ladies' Paradise, where you can get the same goods as Denise's uncle is offering for cheaper and more variety. So Denise's family is challenged by that, challenged by this new business, and challenged on a personal level too, as she decides to go work for Mouret at the Ladies' Paradise. And we meet a host of other characters in an almost Dickensian sense. We meet characters who are addicted to retail therapy, which is not such a modern idea as we think it is, and we see the breakdown of family life as people go to work at the Ladies' Paradise and simply have no time or interest in spending a time with their family members afterward. They don't seem to make time for each other, just for themselves and their hobbies and the things they want to buy. So that's the kind of view that Zola takes of this situation. I found this to be extremely interesting from a historical perspective, because I have always pretty much taken stores for granted, and certainly, superstores or even grocery stores where you can buy a wide variety of products. We forget that it used to be that stores were all very much specialized, and each family had their trade, and you would go to that family shop for something very specific. Also interesting on a historical level, this book was very much based on the original Bon Marché in Paris. So not the American version, not the Macy's. What Zola's sort of painting here for us is its origin story, how it came about, and sort of the darker view that he takes of this new concept of a superstore. And to be fair, Zola does highlight the good and the bad. It's a universal dilemma even today. Large stores create jobs, they clean up some neighborhoods where there's not been many stores before maybe, and they offer affordable prices for middle-class consumers. If nothing else, they keep the city up with the rest of the world, who is going to go ahead with what the world thinks is progress in this area. But at the same time, Zola does underline much of the bad, such as losing those mom and pop stores and the whole devastation to families who are losing generations of skill. And we continue to see this today. I found it to be very relevant to the modern day, a very enlightening story, and I didn't really like the characters that much, and some of the plot elements were not really to my liking, but just what I learned from reading The Ladies' Paradise, it made me think about things that I definitely take for granted, and I think it was definitely worth reading. So if you want to learn about how our stores today came to be and what kinds of pros and cons were attached to that, then you should read The Lady's Paradise. Zola makes it quite a page-turner and really sets you back in time to when these things were coming to life. So that was a book that I read some years ago for college, and I never really got back to reading Zola until really recently. I'm not sure why. I just haven't been reading a lot of 19th century literature lately, at least not from the middle of the century. So it's been a few years, it's been quite a few years since I first met Zola, but I always meant to read something else by him. So this past spring, one of the bloggers who I follow, I'll link to her blog in my show notes. She has an event which she hosts on her blog every year where she reads books by Zola and encourages others to read it as well. It's kind of like a blog challenge. I decided to do it this year. It was this past April, and I chose to read The Kill. And The Kill is the second book in this Rougon Macquart series. This book takes place roughly around the same time as The Lady's Paradise. It focuses on somewhat similar but also slightly different people. The main story is about this man named Aristide Saccar, who is a cold-blooded investor and speculator, and he comes to Paris at a very crucial time of its development and gets in on the insider information and how you can make a fortune, basically flipping houses and buying the right properties and doing some slightly shady business. So it's about him, and it's also about his son, Maxime, and his second wife, named Renée, who is a former schoolgirl turned seductive socialite. We see a lot of the book from Renée's perspective. She is kind of representing someone who used to be middle class, who has married into, well, let's put it this way, she's inherited great wealth. Her husband has increased that wealth to some degree, and she's gone up the social ladder quite a bit and is very much enjoying her turn of fortune. The Kill is about that family, but more than that, it's about France in a sort of cultural/social sense during this time of economic prosperity. And it's about the excesses of this wealthy nation and the way they basically abandoned Catholic morals and pursued every kind of lust. So we're talking political, power-grabbing, material. Renée spends so much money on dresses, and Saccar is very greedy for property. And of course, personal lust, so extramarital affairs are the norm, and nobody in the Saccar's circle seems to particularly care. So lust is becoming the new religion here, and Zola really highlights this in a number of ways, but particularly he makes quite a few analogies to Christian buildings or symbolism when he describes the Saccar's home and their lifestyle. This was kind of interesting. It reminded me of The Great Gatsby, the 2013 movie adaptation, and how the filmmakers chose to portray Gatsby's home as having sort of almost church-like qualities. Like he had this window that was far more elaborate than what I would expect to see in a normal person's home, even a normal person's mansion. It was like a sort of cathedral-shaped window, I guess. And so Zola's doing a similar thing here. He's trying to show you how these people have chosen other things to prioritize in their life and have abandoned religion. At one point, one of the characters says this, and it's just idle talk at a dinner party, but it really sums up a lot of what this book is about. And he says, quote, "Devotion to the emperor is the only virtue, the only form of patriotism in these days of self-interested democracy. He who loves the emperor loves France." And at one point in the story, Renée actually meets the emperor, and there's this sort of strange moment, I guess, between them, where you get the feeling that this quote is essentially true for Renée. Maybe her husband is more focused on himself than really being devoted to the emperor, but there's this kind of almost cult-like following, I guess, is the kind of feeling I got from this book. people following their own lusts and people sort of following after a figurehead who is sort of leading the way. Now, I don't know how historically accurate this is. I did read that Zola did not particularly like Napoleon III, so it could be that he's putting his own spin on this, but in any case, this was how Zola viewed this cultural change, and it certainly hasn't lost its relevancy. So I've made reference to Zola's descriptions here a few times, and I will say that he has some of the most incredible descriptions I've ever read. I think what's so gripping about the way he writes, even his descriptions, is that he has the gift of both highlighting the obvious, but also highlighting certain nuances and subtleties about people, about ideas, about feelings. And he kind of knows when to pull out one and when to pull out the other. Just different things in his toolkit that he is using in his writing, and they're both extremely effective. One thing I really noticed was the undertones of empire in The Kill, especially colonial empire. For example, there's a scene in Sakar's hothouse. This is where he's growing lots of exotic plants, and this is where Renee goes to indulge in romantic fantasies. And Zola goes on to name a lot of the plants in the hothouse. He mentions Cyclanthus from Latin America, Javanese pandanus, the banana tree, euphorbias, which are plants from Abyssinia, which was in modern-day Ethiopia, bamboo from India, Chinese hibiscus, which was presumably from Southeast Asia, which was then called Indochina, and also the ordeal tree, which is a poisonous tree from Madagascar. So throughout this scene, which is building up to Renee's passions, Zola is showing you all the different plants in the hothouse, and he's just sort of like nudging you, showing you that these are all the things that the French Empire has collected from various places it's been to and which it is colonizing. And I found that to be extremely evocative, and also a little bit feeling that indeed there are excesses here, and it's not like there's anything wrong with collecting plants, but you feel like in the context of Sakar's hothouse, it is a frivolity. You feel like he has taken these plants out of their natural setting and put them all in his hothouse just because he can, not because he even particularly enjoys the plants personally. It's because he can, and it's a proof of his power and his wealth and of the extent of the French Empire. So that is the vibe I was getting from this scene, and it shows you just how well Zola can write a scene and draw you into it and make you feel it from the time period in which it occurred. So this is really the bulk of what The Kill is about. These themes and these characters' behaviors and the climate of just doing what you want and taking what you want. That is how Zola viewed Paris of the day. While Zola seemed to take a pretty clear moral stand against the characters' behavior, there were some pages of long, drawn-out descriptions of Renee's sex life, sort of in a romance novel way. It was, I don't know, I was not expecting that, and, maybe one scene I can get past, but, there were pages of it, and I got 2/3 through the book, and after, trying to get through these chapters, it was like, I'm done. I don't really enjoy reading about that stuff, and I can use my time better elsewhere. So honestly, I decided to quit after 2/3 of the book, and I felt like I did get the bulk of the story, even though I didn't finish it. Which leads me to a point that I've been kind of wanting to make, and something that I've been really weighing lately in my mind. First of all, I believe that classic literature should never be a chore or a burden to read. I'm not a huge fan of required reading, at least, choosing one book and telling people they must read this book. I think, giving someone a list of books or a large variety of suggestions, I think that is a better approach to get people interested in literature. But in any case, I don't think that you should feel like you have to read something just because other people do or just because it's famous. And I don't think you should be a slave to completionism. So something that I have always struggled with, or not really struggled with, but I've just sort of like out of habit, I've been a person who has always finished a book. If it was a series, I would finish the series. It didn't matter if I particularly loved it or not. I just felt like I had to finish it, and that, I was like not being a good reader if I didn't finish it. For example, I read the Anne of Green Gables series when I was pretty young, but I didn't really like it that much, to be honest. So I just like plowed through like the second half of the series without much joy, just sort of, reading it. I gotta finish the series. But I don't really believe in reading like that anymore. Life is limited, and I think that completionism is a good habit to have. I don't think you should just quit books regularly. It's a good habit to finish a book, but you need to focus on what you're gaining from reading. What are you learning? What is improving your life? What's making you relate better to other people? What are you going to use to become a better person? Or just what do you like that is entertaining to you, that's fun to read? So focus on what you're looking for, what you're gaining, and don't spend too much time on things that are going to be losses. And I definitely gained something from reading The Kill. I'm glad I tried to read it. I read quite a bit of it, most of it, and I stopped when it stopped being worthwhile for me. So I encourage you, if you feel like you have to complete every book you read, if you get to a point where it's just not being rewarding for you anymore, then quit. Find another book, find another classic, find something else that's going to reward your life and that you're going to learn from. And it's not going to be just, you plowing through something that is not beneficial to you. So just a little aside there, but very relevant to Zola, because I get the sense from his fiction that, he definitely indulged in more racy writing than maybe other of his contemporaries. That doesn't mean I would never read anything by him again. I actually plan to read more books from this Rougon Macquart series, but I decided to not finish The Kill. That said, I found it to be extremely interesting from a historical and social perspective, and just another reminder that people don't really change. You can find a lot of people from modern day in The Kill if you read it through that lens, even without trying. So there's a lot you can learn from The Kill, and I will certainly take a closer look at French history because, to be honest, my knowledge of it is pretty shaky, but I do want to learn more. And I hope someday to learn how to read French, because I would love to read these books in the original language. But I was pretty pleased, as it is, with the translations that I've read. And these were the Oxford World Classics editions. So thanks for joining me on this episode. I hope you are reading great books today, and I hope to see you next week.